From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening and welcome. I'd like to welcome you to the Fellowship of Southern Writers celebration. I'm Ralph Eubanks. I'm Director of Publishing here at the Library of Congress. And tonight it's my great pleasure to introduce my fellow Mississippian and U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey. When I left Mississippi more than 30 years ago, I tried to leave the place behind. Even stripping the twang of my birthplace from my voice. But eventually I embraced the South and Mississippi and all of its imperfections. So when I read Natasha Trethewey's poetry for the first time, I knew that I had discovered a kindred spirit. What I immediately admired in Natasha's poems was the way she faced the demons of the South and its traditions head on, staring at them deeply and daring them to blink. Her poetry is as brave as it is eloquent. Natasha Trethewey is the Poet Laureate of the United States, but she's a brilliant prose stylist as well. I'm a great admirer of Beyond Katrina, A Meditation on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, because in the pages of that book, she faces and confronts uncomfortable parts of her past and the present. Natasha shows the reader how sometimes what is lost can only be captured by memory. And her prose captures memory with poetic precision. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our host for the evening, the Poet Laureate of the United States, Natasha Trethewey.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this is really exciting. Thank you all for being here. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this special reading to celebrate the vitality of Southern literature featuring members of the Fellowship of Southern Writers. Founded in 1987, the Fellowship seeks to recognize and encourage literature in the South through a variety of activities, including the election to membership of distinguished writers in the categories of fiction, poetry, drama, criticism, and history. Among the 22 charter members of the organization are historians C. Van Woodward, John Hope Franklin, and Shelby Foote, as well as novelists and short story writers like Walker Percy, Eudora Welty, Ernest Gaines, and Elizabeth Spencer, and former consultants in poetry to the Library of Congress, James Dickey and Robert Penn Warren, who also served as the first Poet Laureate of the United States and my Southern predecessor. To be elected to membership, a writer must have been born and raised or have resided for a significant part of his or her life in the South, or have written works that in character and spirit embody aspects of Southern experience. Still, one might ask, what is Southern about the literature produced by these writers? The founders of the Fellowship believed that the American South to be an identifiable and distinctive cultural and social community, a vital contributor to the canon of American literature. Indeed, the literature of the South, its characters, style, landscape, language, idioms, bearing the weight of its history, has caught the imagination of the world in ways that it seems no other region has. It stands out monumentally. As Mississippian Eudora Welty put it, place, geography, and climate shapes characters. Place is the world in which they act that makes their experiences, what they act for and react against. It furnishes the economic background a writer grows up in and the folkways and the stories that come down to him from his family. It is the fountainhead of her knowledge and experience. I imagine this to be true whether the South is one's native or adopted land. It is certainly true for me. I was born to the geography of the Deep South, the state of Mississippi with its terrible beauty, land of King Cotton, land of a brutal history of slavery, of violence, racism, and injustice, one of the poorest states in the nation. But also, I was born to a place of fertile delta soil, one of the most fertile regions on earth, birthplace of the blues, home to a tradition of writers like William Faulkner, Richard Wright, and Tennessee Williams. I have inherited from this geography both great cultural richness and great suffering. Of course, we know, too, that a writer isn't simply limited by place or mere regional identification. The imagination, books, travel, empathy, all sorts of things expand that knowledge, as evidenced by the writers you will hear from today, whose bios are printed in your program. I joined the fellowship 4 years ago, and I can tell you that as soon as I knew such an organization existed, I wanted to be a member. I had long admired the work of these writers whose relationships to their particular Souths, to history and to culture, helped me to make sense of my own. Before we welcome them to the stage, I'd like to read a poem by Robert Penn Warren. Tell Me a Story. Long ago in Kentucky, I, a boy, stood by a dirt road in first dark and heard the great geese hoot northward. I could not see them, there being no moon and the stars sparse. I heard them. I did not know what was happening in my heart. It was the season before the elderberry blooms, therefore they were going north. The sound was passing northward. Tell me a story. In this century and moment of mania, tell me a story. Make it a story of great distances and starlight. The name of the story will be Time, but you must not pronounce its name. Tell me a story of deep delight. Please join me now in welcoming this distinguished group of Southern writers, Charles Wright, Madison Smart Bell, Edward P. Jones, Jill McCorkle, and Ron Rash, to bring us a deep delight.
That's pretty heavy-duty material to follow. Well, as Red Warren said, or intimated, that all Southern gatherings begin with a story. And I'm the only Southerner I know who cannot tell one. I thought I'd tell one anyhow. Years ago, when I was a boy, my mother said to me, she said, "Son, a couple of things. First, don't ever eat at a place called Mom's. Don't ever play poker with a guy named Doc. And never get involved with a girl who has more problems than you do." And lastly, she said, "Listen, if you ever start writing poems and are at a gathering that has both poets and prose writers, for God's sakes, boy, don't ever follow a fiction writer." So that's why I'm first. And the light has been sequestered. I thought I'd start by reading a poem that has nothing to do with the South, except that I'm in it. It's called Homage to Giorgio Morandi, who was the great Italian painter who died in 1964, who did all those bottles and still lifes, in case you don't know who he is. You, of all the masters, have been the secret sharer of what's most important, exclusion, until the form is given us out of what has been given and never imposed upon. Scrape and erase until the object comes clear. I well remember the time I didn't visit you in Bologna in 1964, the year you died. Bob Koffler and Wolf Kahn went, marrying all the rest of us remaining in Rome. What a mistake. The next thing we heard was your cocodrilo in the Daily American. And now you become iconic as only is right. Rizzano and Atelier permanent as a pair of finger rings on your worldwide hands. The farther out of the picture you go, the greater it grows. The farther out of our lives you go, la stessa storia. And now you have become an eternal occasion. The less in view, the more your presence surrounds us and concentrates our tick-tock attention. How proper it is we see you most where you are not, among your objects. This bottle, for instance, this vase. Bologna made you and Bologna undid you in the scheme of things. It never mattered to you. How little we knew about your life. How little we knew about anything. The Roman nights so florid and opposite of all that you stood for. We bathed in our own dark waters. You dabbled your brush in yours. The would-be artist's credo, he keeps to himself and doesn't play well with others, found short shrift on your star chart. Still, no serious time for anything but your work. You looked as hard as anyone ever looked, then left it out. That, of course, is the opposite of Southern writing, which puts everything in. But what the hell? You gotta have one boll weevil in this. This light is a pain in the nuke. It's a shot. Ta-da! Good. And then, if any of you were there last night at Georgetown, I'm going to read a poem I read there again because I was asked to, and the person who asked me is so beautiful and smart, I couldn't say no. You know? How's that for an introduction to Southern writing that Natasha did? I mean, it kind of blows me away, actually. This is called Toadstools. The toadstools are starting to come up, circular and dry. Nothing will touch them. Gophers or chipmunks, wasps or swallows, they glow in the twilight like rooted will-o'-the-wisps. Nothing will touch them. As though little roundabouts from the bunched unburial, powers, dominions, as though orphans rode herd in the short grass, as though they had heard the call, they will always be with us, transcenders of the world. Someone will try to stick his beak into their otherworldly styrofoam. Someone may try to taste a taste of forever. For some it's a refuge, for some a shady place to fall down. Grief is a floating barge boat. Who knows where it's going to moor? And now I'm going to read, Jesus Christ, I got 15 more minutes. Here you go. God almighty. How did I get so far ahead of myself? Okay, I'll read 2 more poems. No, this is ridiculous. I'll read one and get off and let the 18-wheelers come on down the road, because as Flannery O'Connor says, you don't want to get caught with your Volkswagen on the highway when the 18-wheelers come through. This is the only determinate Southern poem I've ever written. And it's called My Own Little Civil War. And it goes like this. I come from the only county in Tennessee that did not secede throughout the entire Civil War. Sullivan County, rock-ribbed, recalcitrant Appalachian cornerstone. My kinfolks were otherwise, Arkansas and Mississippians, Virginians and Tar Heels. Still, I was born just a half mile from Shiloh Churchyard and had a relative, the family story goes, who served there, Confederate quartermaster, who took the occasion that first day to liberate many bills from Union coffers as the Johnnies swept through to the river, and never replaced them when the Bluebellies swept back and through the following afternoon. VMI is Virginia Military Institute. I don't have to say that here. My great-grandfather Wright left VMI to join up with Lee in the Army of Northern Virginia somewhere near Richmond, and ended up, lucky lad, a staff officer in the general's command. Who knows how many letters that took. After the war, he went back to Lexington with Lee, the general, to Washington College in immortality, Captain Wright at the far end of town, still marching away the lost cause. Morris Robert had his horse and white tomb under the oak trees. My great-grandfather has his name in a long, thin line of others who were captains of the Corps of Cadets. 2 little boys, too late. My great-grandfather Penzel, 4 years in the country, saddled up in 1861 in Little Rock with the Capital City Guards and struck out for Tennessee. His name is last on the list, carved in print on an obelisk in front of a civic building somewhere near downtown. Like just about everybody else, he finished the war as a captain, enduring the raw campaigns of Southeast Tennessee, Chickamauga, 2 years in Rock Island Prison, deep wounds in his mouth and elsewhere. Then back like all the others into the thick of it. A long way for a country boy, slaveless and no stake in it, from the green hills of Bohemia. There are letters from Isaac Wright, Bladen County, North Carolina, 1856, to his son near Lafayette Courthouse, Red River, Arkansas. A dozen or so I cannot decipher, political and familial, about President Franklin Pierce, wishing that John C. Calhoun were still alive and president instead, and the constitutional rights of the South established with greater force and greater clarity. I fear that we shall yet have difficulties with our northern brethren. And then the price of things, nearby farms, the fear of high water, the price of cotton always, the price of cotton. Then love to Elizabeth, my son, and you and the children. All this from the documents left by my great-aunt Marcella, a folder that also holds inexplicably my grandmother's marriage license, and one short sketch so titled of the Fulton and Nowlin families. So much for all that. However, wrapped in wax paper, among the letters is another small envelope containing a lock, so-called, of Robert E. Lee's hair, sent by him to the wife of the lucky lad from VMI. That's it, my own little Civil War. A lock of hair, a dozen unreadable letters, an obit or two, and half the weight and half life of a half-healed and hurting world. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you. Well, if that's the second copy, in case I lost the first one. But, you know, I'm fully armed right now. If not for her, I wouldn't even be here. That's a fact. Well, I was looking to find something appropriate to read for this occasion, and I couldn't. So I'm going to read a short story. Well, I pulled out this short story called Zigzag Wanderer after the Captain Beefheart song that I'm sure you all know. But it was way too long, so I cut 2/3 of it out. And the first thing to go was the plot. So you're looking for a great Southern storytelling. We're still working our way into that. You know, Charles explicitly didn't, and I'm not going to either quite. The setting is Thatcherite London, mid-1980s. Zigzag Wanderer. I had been lost a long time before I found you, my brother. I had been a stranger in more cities than one. I stood on the fire escape beyond the kitchen door, my shoe soles braced against the strips of rusting iron, suspended above the courtyard of the council housing. The buildings raised their walls of cherry red sandblasted brick, an age of soot just lately scrubbed away from them. A slight dampness in the air made a prism to freeze the weird white autumn sunlight. It would have magnified the slightest sound, bell-like, but there was no sound. In the lift, descending, Madame Krepakian, her old-world frailty, hat secured with a murderous pin, the Harrods shopping bag. She composed the tissue paper wrinkles of her face to annihilate my presence from her mind. Below, Fulham Road was full of the idle rich, going among the purveyors of one luxury or another. It was strange to see you on the street, my brother, and all the women scattered from you like starlings on the lawn. Ahead of you was a shopping cart, battered and sprung from years of abandon, piled with the usual rag and bone, and strung with enormous plastic jerry cans. You were massive, overpowering, thick through the body like a hogshead. Your skin was hot earth brown, your hair cut close and flecked with white. Your face was fierce but abstracted, too. I was nothing to you. You crossed the street to a little sweet shop, but they gave you no time to show your money. The woman who ran the postal window shouted at you and drove you out. Rubbish, she called, flailing a broom. 2 other old ladies flanked her in the doorway. Her regular patrons stopped in for a stamp and a chat. You snarled back at her from the curbstone, then began pushing your cart away. On King's Road, one of a trio of skinheads crashed into you deliberately, then drew back, challenging you to respond. You smiled down on him very slowly, heavy lips drawing back from large, square, slightly yellowed teeth, and spread your hand enough to show how it might embrace the shaven head and crush it like the egg it looked. The skinheads backed away from you, swallowing the insults they had meant to say. In the small garden behind St. Luke's, you sat down on a bench to rest a moment. It was quiet, and there the dregs of your anger leached away. You stared at the concentric rings of floral colors, remembering the island where you were young, bougainvillea twined along the cracked masonry of a churchyard wall, and a hummingbird hovering over the tongue of a bell-shaped bloom. The breeze shivered the jerry cans strung to your cart, making a hollow, strumming sound. Through the cartwheels you stared, street level. A woman's white-stockinged ankles flicked by, hastening with a clatter of heels. A man's black wingtops, each step definitive. The wandering, stumbling, slope-heel shoes were mine. I had lost a screw from my glasses, so I stumbled along the drizzling street, scanning the ground for something to jury-rig them. A pen or a paperclip, even a bit of toothpick might have done. I went along, holding the disconnected pieces in either hand, now and then fitting them together as they were meant to go. You saw my difficulty then, my brother, and brought me over to your cart with a word or a gesture. I don't think I heard you speak. The jerry cans were gone today. The upper bars of a cart were laced with smaller things, a string of beads, a plastic dolly with one leg missing, dangling upside down, the looped filament of fine copper wire you disengaged and gave to me. A ragged man with a long white beard was sipping a styrofoam cup of coffee and smiling benignly on a lean old lady in black lace and pearls, red holes in the gums where his teeth should have been. Evidently some party of the homeless had just been fed. Theater goers sorted themselves out and through the others, making from the riverbank the tube stations and the buses. Already you were pushing your cart away, and at a breakneck pace for those close quarters. A woman who'd been jostled shrieked, and some of the other homeless men were harrying your heels and shouting. Some dispute over food, territory, then you were clear of the theater crowd, but others rose up from the long receding row of cardboard shanties, began to shout at you. The line of zigzag houses stretched all the way to the horizon, where the yellow underbelly of a theater crushed down like the ceiling of a cave. You stopped and turned, raising your hands and roaring without words, like Moses come down from the mountain, or a bear who turns on the hounds the last. Your cart began to empty as winter tightened down, more and more rags removed to wrap around your body. The wind went whistling down King's Road. The doorway to my block of flats was deeply recessed between tall slabs of greenish marble, backed with a door of polished oak and brass. The space was deep enough that you could pull your cart inside it. You rested, breathing through your mouth, hands flattened against the wall. The wind was broken altogether. Against your open palm, the marble was smooth and cold as fresh spring water. You were dozing when I passed you there, sleeping on your feet like a horse. The close, rank smell of you was warm between the slabs of marble. Little wraiths of steam filtered out between your parted, graying lips. I saw how the skin of your hands was thick and chafed, whitened like limestone. You looked at me, eyes dark under the heavy brows. In the kitchen of my maisonette, I made a sandwich to take down to you. I remember that sandwich very well. Duck liver pâté spread on a soft white roll. I believe I put some mustard on it. But then I thought, it won't stop with a sandwich, will it? Before it's done, I'll have to give up all I own. You furnished our entryway with more cardboard, ragged blankets, rolls of rag. In the cold, dark center of the night, you lay bundled in these materials, remembering. Then you were walking through the coconut grove by the shore, machete dangling from your hand. All the palm leaves danced together in the breeze like the ties at Shepherd's Bush Market, but they made a sound like rain. On the green surface of the marble, whorled patterns turned like spiral galaxies. That morning, you looked at them for a long time. Shoes tossed aside, you sat on the doorsill, trimming your long, thick toenails with a pair of white cutting pliers. A string of shells hung from the cart and made a slight chiming sound as the wind blew. Also, there was something else tied there, by hamstrung ankles as it looked, about the size of a human infant, but unidentifiable because it had been skinned. The stench from the carcass was really very strong. Left of the door, the marble had been thoroughly drawn over in two colors, red and blue, strange curling characters that looked like Arabic, though they were not. In the lift, descending, I watched the walls of a shaft slip by. Then the space of a ground floor foyer came into view. The outdoor opened, and Madame Kropotkin came stumbling in. A strand of her iron-colored hair had uncurled from the spike of her hairpin. She was breathless and a little flushed. "Oh," she said, "that awful tramp. The stench of him, one can't get through," she said. "That dreadful corpse he's keeping there, what is it? Do you know, he frightens me." She entered the lift and began to rise. Through the broad diamond mesh, I saw her eyes were on me, sharp as the point of her hat pin. She began to disappear into the ceiling, her hat, her head, her emaciated bosom, her sternly laced-up high black shoes. "Sir," I said, "I'm going out. Sir, can you hear me, sir? Do you think you could clear off some of this cardboard, make a path for us at least? You know, the people can't get through." Cardboard, rags, the card itself, everything had been removed. Only the blue and red hieroglyphs on the marble were still there, and I stared at them for a long time, till the marble deepened, opened into a vortex that drew me further in, and I saw what you'd drawn were no private runes, but the map of your zigzag dreams. The zigzag lines went swimming through the marble, and I wanted to dive in, but I could not follow you. You had already gone. We both know that time moves backward, my brother. We are both embarked on a long journey toward our origins. Therefore, I have come to the island at last. I have walked down the row of zigzag houses, following the school children in their green uniforms, and the chickens that walk ahead of me in the street to the place where the bay turns toward the headland. I have gone into the bar that faces the ocean and bought cups of cask rum from the cinder block shack and sat on the concrete terrace to drink them, looking out over the thin strip of sand to the water. That day it was very still. A torn chain link fence raised on 2x4s divided me from the water. The shadow of twin mountains on the headland cast a deeper blue across that smooth, still surface. The rum was thick like a clear oil, and the air was thick and hot. Beyond the ragged diamonds of the fence, a small spotted dog rolled on her back to scratch herself against the sand, exposing gray-black dugs, fat and heavy with milk. A lean man came sculling across the quiet blue water on a broken windboard, bent low to whatever it was he used for oars. My eye followed him, and I saw you then, my brother. You came from the headland with a cutlass in your right hand and a green coconut in your left. You were in the prime of youth. Your chest was silky, glossy with sweat, and your arms and legs were carelessly strong. As you passed along the strand before the place where I was sitting, you cut the stem from the coconut with the cutlass, raised it to your lips, and drank the milk, threw it down. Then you passed by, walking toward the river crossing in the town. I saw how it was then, my brother, that we have destroyed the world. It is all our own unmaking. The place in which we might have met has been undone. I watched your back receding through the ripped links of the fence and wished that I might reach you, and knew I never could. But a new day is coming for us, my brother. We will meet once again in our great age. We will be older than dinosaurs then, and our skins will be rougher than the stones. We will meet by the river where the women wash the clothes. There we will both come out of our skins like snakes. I will put on the garment that you have laid down, my brother, and you will do the same with the one that I have shed. Then, truly, I will live your life, and you will live mine. Thank you. Next up, real Southern storytelling.
I haven't had a new prescription for glasses since '05, so I'm I suppose the story I'm reading is appropriate. These are the opening pages of a story called Blindsided. After the white woman Roxanne Stapleton worked for in Silver Spring gave her a ride across the northern border into Washington, Roxanne, without much waiting, was able to catch a DC Transit bus heading down 14th Street, northwest. The bus going down 11th Street would have put her closer to her room on 10th, but it was still early Friday evening, and the show at the Howard Theater wasn't until 8:30, and the white woman would be far away in another world until Monday. And too, going down 14th had always been good luck. Long ago, she had met Cedric on a 14th Street bus, dark Cedric with green eyes, Cedric of the 2.5 years. She had once found a $20 bill on a 14th Street bus, so because there was time to spare, she took the 14th Street bus. The bus was half full, and Roxanne managed to get the first seat after the side door, her favorite spot. "Now, you be sure to have a good weekend, Roxanne," the white woman she worked for had said, the same thing she had been saying for 4 years. Her white woman was to tut-tut over the telephone on Monday morning and ask, "Did you injure yourself inadvertently over the weekend, Roxanne? Maybe at one of your Negro functions?" The white woman had her ideas about what black people did with their lives, especially on weekends, and just about everything they did in her mind could lead to blindness. By the time the bus reached Rittenhouse Street, a woman had sat down beside Roxanne, and the haze was already over her eyes. Roxanne blinked once, and her eyes started to clear, and then she blinked twice more, and all was as before. Between Randolph Street and Park Road, the haze returned and refused to go away with more blinking. It was October, the days growing shorter as they rushed toward the end, and she, ever a poor daughter of the universe, attributed the haze to the world's gradual loss of daylight, and she was exhausted. After they crossed Harvard Street and before they could reach Girard Street, with the bus now offering standing room only, she became worried because the haze remained steadfast. She considered herself a woman of some refinement and would not talk to just anyone on a bus, but she was so worried that she turned to the woman beside her and asked, "Miss, you see something on my eyes?" Leaning toward the woman, Roxanne opened her eyes as wide as she could. "Let me see," the woman said, and took Roxanne's chin in her hand and pulled it to her. "No, they just look like regular eyes to me. You got something in your eyes?" "There's something growing over my eyes, that's all. It's like cheesecloth." "Cheesecloth?" the woman said. "What's cheesecloth?" "I just can't see the way I usually see. That's what I'm saying." Roxanne closed her eyes and used her index fingers to massage her temples. Just relax, she told herself. Her Catholic friend Agnes Simmons had prayers to have some saint for every ailment. Who was the saint for blind people? And had he himself been struck blind? At Clifton Street, the bus stopped for some time after a man got on and dropped the 25 pennies he had for his fare. Not one fell into the fare box. People laughed as the bus driver said to no one in particular that they should outlaw paying with pennies. "I pay your salary with these pennies," the man said at one point, down on his hands and knees. Each time he found a penny, he would stand up and drop it in the box. "You don't pay my salary with nothing," said the driver. Refused to move until the man had paid his full fare. "Oh, yes, I do, too. Here's a little bit of it now." And he stood and put in a penny. "All right, y'all," a man seated behind the driver said. He had roses in his arm, cradled there like a small child. "I'll pay his GD fare, and you just get this bus going." People applauded. He leaned over the penny man on the floor and put a quarter in the box, and the driver pulled back into traffic. The man with the penny stayed on the floor, and the bus driver said he would have to move behind the white line, as required by the laws and regulations of Washington, D.C. "On that floor is my tip for you," the man said, and stood up. Roxanne, trying to remember if she had seen any white people on the bus, did not laugh with everyone else. She had kept her eyes closed once the woman next to her had looked into them, but before the intersection of Florida Avenue, she opened them, and there was nothing but darkness. Her heart sank, and she gave up a tiny yelp. "Lady," she said to the woman beside her, "I think I'm blind. I don't know what I'm going to do." "You a blind, lady? How long you been blind, honey?" "Just now. It just happened. You have to tell the bus driver because I don't know what I'm going to do." "You blind? You do good to be blind. I wouldn't go about it if I was blind, I can tell you that." "Please, just tell the driver. I got her seeing and now I can't see. Tell him that, please." "Oh, you just got blind? That's what you say?" "Yes, just now. I could see all day, but now I can't." The woman stood up. "Driver, we have a poor blind woman here. You hear me?" The word was taken forward. "We got a blind woman that went off this bus, driver," people from Roxanne up to the front began saying. "Driver, ain't you listening?" the penny man said. "That's just like D.C. Transit to hold a blind woman up." The driver stopped between Swan and S Streets. "What is this commotion?" he said after he stood up and looked back. His view was not good because of the standing people. "Somebody hurt?" "There are a blind woman that went off," said the penny man, who was standing midway between the driver and Roxanne. What he said was repeated until he reached Roxanne, who said as loud as her dignity would permit, "No, please. I was just now struck blind. I could see when I got on, and now I can't. I was just struck blind." "She was struck blind on your rickety-ass bus," a woman across from Roxanne said. "I hope she sued D.C. Transit for everything y'all got." "You're working for that blind lady now, big shot," the penny man said to the driver, who was making his slow way back to Roxanne. "Try being nasty to your new boss, lady, and see how long you keep your job. Fire him right now, lady. He made you blind." The driver reached Roxanne. "Lady, why didn't you tell me you was blind when you got on? I could have put you by me and it would have made things easier." Roxanne thought she remembered his face, the bill of the hat cocked a bit more up than it should be, and a face too womanish to suit her. "That's just it," Roxanne said to the driver. "I wasn't blind when I got on. Right now, right here, on my bus? Yes, I could see when I paid my fare." She sighed because at last her words and his words made it all real. For herself, for the entire bus, Roxanne Stapleton was blind. "I could see," she said, and the words were only a few degrees above a whisper, which was how she liked to speak in public. People said she got loud when she drank, but she didn't believe them. "I ain't just like every colored person from every corner of the world. I just can't see now." Would the show at Howard Theater ever come back? Was Sam Cooke the kind of man to wait for a blind woman? "You want to go to the hospital?" the driver said. "I don't know. There's no pain. I do know I want to get home now." "Where you live?" she told him. "I know where that is," the penny man said. He had followed the driver through the standing crowd, round the corner from the fire station on R Street, right? "Yes," Roxanne said. "You mind taking her home?" the driver said. The man leaned over and looked out a window up and down 14th Street. When he rose up again, pennies in his pockets jangled. "This way before my stop," the man said. But I could see her home. "You want this man to see you home, lady?" Roxanne nodded her head. "I'd appreciate it." The driver led her to the front and wrote down her name and address and her friend Agnes's telephone number, because Roxanne used her money for clothes rather than the telephone. "I'm sorry about all this," the driver said, and placed in her hand a slip of paper with the names of the D.C. Transit people she should contact. Then he opened the door and people started saying, "Good luck to you, lady. Good luck to you, blind lady." The man went down the steps first, his pennies jangling with each movement, and then he reached up and took her hand and guided her down. The door of the bus closed and it went on, and the sound of it leaving was the saddest sound she had heard in a long time. At the corner of West and 14th Streets, she asked the man where they were. She was surprised when he told her, because she had thought they were still on the other side of Florida Avenue. "If you get a good night's sleep, your sight might come back," the man said, placing her right hand around his left upper arm. "What's your name, lady?" she told him. "I'm Lowell, and I'll see you home safe." He did not sound like a man so down in the world that he had only pennies for money. "I really appreciate this, Lowell," Lowell said. "No big deal." I know the blind woman when I was a boy in Anacostia. She raised 5 children by herself after her husband died, walking to work. That lady could pour your cup up to the top and not spill a drop while she was doing it. They turned and went up 10th, and at her building, she wanted to know if there was a light on in the basement, and when he said there was, she asked him to go down and knock at the door. Mary Benoit and her 2 children lived there. Mary wasn't a drinker or a partier, but she and Roxanne, ever a woman in search of a good time, were friendly enough. She wanted now to be with people she knew, whose voices she recognized. Mary's 9-year-old daughter Adele came out. "Hi, you, Miss Roxanne?" "I'm blind, honey. It just happened." "Blind? Oh, no, Miss Roxanne. Your mother home yet?" Lowell had placed Roxanne's hand on the railing before knocking, and now he took that hand and put it in the girl's hand. "My mama not home yet," Adele said, "but Taylor, he home." The girl began rubbing the hand Lowell had given her, rubbing it in both of hers, the way she had seen people in the movies do, with someone who had cold hands. "I best get on," Lowell said, "unless you need me for something else." "Oh, no," Roxanne said. "You've been so good to me. Let me give you a little something for all your trouble. I know you went out your way." She began to open her pocketbook, but he put his hand over hers. "I don't need your money, lady. Just try to get better, that's all." And he stepped away. "Adele, baby, would you see me to my place?" Her room was on the first floor, a few feet beyond the front door, a large room with a sink and an icebox and a stove, along with a bed and dresser and everything else she needed to make a good life. She had been there 6 years. Adele unlocked the door and Roxanne switched on the light just inside the door and stepped inside. The room smelled the same, spick and span mingling with the perfume she had put on that morning before going out to clean her white woman's house and cook her food. Roxanne sat on the bed. Adele helped her take off her sweater. "Miss Roxanne, you really blind? Why would I lie about something like that, girl?" The edge in her voice made Adele shut down. Why would a body lie about being less than what it was? Roxanne had a daughter, way back in Louisiana, 9 ugly miles outside of Baton Rouge. But she had not raised a daughter, and she had not seen her in 2 years, the last time Roxanne had visited Antibes Nouveau. There was a picture of her daughter in a gold-looking metal frame on the tiny table beside the bed in her room. The girl was 5 years old in the picture, but that had been 6 years ago. Roxanne turned now to Adele and said, trying to put a little warmth in her voice, "Baby girl, would you mind hanging up my sweater?" The room had no closet, just a long wooden rack that Roxanne hung all her clothes on. Her daughter had never seen Washington. "I don't think I can reach up there, Miss Roxanne, unless I get on the chair." "Well, just hang it on the back of the chair." During the visit to Antibes Nouveau 2 years before, her daughter had first avoided her, and then, on the eve of her return to Washington, the child had begged her not to go. With Roxanne still on the bed, Adele remained near the chair, which was unlike her when around Roxanne. When grown-ups talked mean, the child liked to stay to herself. "Adele? Ma'am? You looking at me?" "Yes, ma'am, but I wasn't staring hard or nothing." She was not a child of lies. "Come over here. I'm still the same Miss Roxanne." She opened her arms, and the girl put her head into the woman's lap. Roxanne felt herself wanting to cry. Maybe this wasn't just something to mess up her weekend. Maybe this was always and always. "You going back downstairs and tell your mama to come up when she get here." "I can stay if you want me to. I'll stay with you." "No." Roxanne told her to take the lock off the door and pull it shut. Behind her room were stairs that went down to the basement, and she could hear Adele going down. Long ago she had heard of a man in a foreign country, a man the doctors had made into a woman. If they could do that, then they could restore her sight. Those doctors had had a long way to go, for the man had never been a woman. They might not have to go as far with her, for she had known sight all her life. She stood and put her arms out. "This how blind people act," she thought. "This how all them poor blind people act." At the mirror over the sink, she blinked and blinked, hoping. She put her face close to the mirror, so close that the breath came out of her and bounced against the glass and returned to warm her nose. "You look like $1 million to a man that been poor all his life," her boyfriend had said not long after she arrived in Washington. Pulling her head back, she reached up and touched the mirror. She was beautiful, and the whole world had always told her so. That boyfriend was dead now. And being that he was dead, and being that she was blind, how true were the words. What would happen to her beautiful face now? She tapped the mirror and then touched all the features of her face. What would happen? She had not learned very many big things about herself while living in Washington, but one big thing she had learned was that if she was not first beautiful in her own eyes, then she was beautiful in no one's eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm reading from a novel that has a whole lot of different characters, and I'm just going to give a sampling from two. Many of these characters are residing in an assisted living nursing facility. And the first you'll hear from is Sadie. I think the only thing I need to say is that this is right after that piece came out in the paper where the cat in the nursing home would go curl up beside the person who was about to die. And so this cat, Harley, has gone from being the most beloved creature in the place to now having shoes and cups tossed his way. Sadie Randolph has always seen the sunnier side of life, and she's not sure why that is, just that it is. People criticize it. A lot of people don't like looking at a half-full glass, but she has spent her life doing just that and feels now that she's 85 and bound to a wheelchair she wouldn't have chosen to live any other way. Even now there are things to be happy about. She was born to good people. She got to go to school and become a school teacher when many of the people she grew up with were not so fortunate. She married a nice boy from right there in the county she had known her whole life, and he continued to run the hardware store and feed and grain sales just like his father and grandfather before him. They had 3 fine children, all college educated and now with families of their own, lived in a 2-story brick house across the street from the Methodist church they attended, and she taught the 3rd grade for 40 years. Horace died young, a sudden heart attack while playing football on Thanksgiving afternoon. It was what he and their sons did every Thanksgiving, a town pickup game known for years as the Giblet Gravy Bowl. He dropped dead, and he couldn't help that. He looked to be in great shape, and there was no warning whatsoever. And of course she was angry and scared at first, and then so heartbroken and disappointed, but he couldn't help it, and she had to keep going. Sadie herself had always wanted a little dog that would follow her from room to room like a shadow, and that's exactly what she got after Horace died. She loved the big yellow Labradors they had always had as a family, Honey and Goldie and Spitz after the swimmer who won all those medals. But Rudy was all hers, a little Pekingese she misses to this day. But sometimes if she lays her sweater just right at the foot of her bed, it looks just like him. And sometimes she can even get to a place in her mind where she can hear him snore. She loves when Harley comes meowing at her door and spends some time purring on her lap. Bless poor Harley, the way he's treated these days. She wants to tell those who are so mean to him that the one they should really fear coming and sitting beside them is little Joanna Lam, the hospice volunteer. She's the one who comes to usher out those ready to go. She is the real sweet angel of death, and Sadie suspects is very good at what she does. She was always a fine student, even though she had some trouble finding her way. She liked to do jobs like beat the erasers or straighten up the cloakroom, and Sadie assigned her these things often in hopes it would build some confidence. Her parents were fine, hard-working people, but they were hard on her to succeed, maybe too hard. Some children just can't take that. Some just don't have the makeup, and they need to be handled in a gentler way. There was a time when a child who squirmed too much in class was thought to have worms, but now they call it ADD. Worms, little Abby from next door asked one day when Sadie told this, and somebody had to tell the full story of how children's bottoms had to get checked at night with a flashlight to see if they had the pinworms. Not in Boston, they didn't, Rachel Silverman said, and everybody laughed. Someone Sadie worked with in the schools used to say to children right there before the others, "You need to have your bottom checked." And you know that child was likely embarrassed to death. Even an overly confident child would have to find that humiliating. Sadie told the woman that she taught with that was a very unkind way to handle the problem. This was the same woman who taught what an improper fraction was by first making the smallest boy in the class, Edward Tyner, sit on her lap, and she would say proper, and then she'd turn and sit on top of him and say improper. The children, of course, thought it was hilarious, yet Edward never did do very well in life, and Sadie has always thought this was likely a factor in that. Sadie has always tried to observe a code of ethics and manners. People get old, but in the eyes they might as well be 8. Always they're about 8. And so Sadie is well versed in 8-year-old fear. She knows the heart of 8-year-olds and believes when all is said and done and hard times come, that's how old we are in the heart, forever 8 years old. She used to love to set up the abacus at the front of the room and have children tell what they knew of their lives, one bead at a time. Holding to the little round wooden bead gave them confidence as they spoke the facts of their lives. I was born in Hamlet. I have a sister and a dog. I love grits. I hate mayonnaise. Things like that. They loved seeing the beads accumulate, transferring over to the 10 spot. It was a lesson in math and English. It was a lesson in socializing. I miss my other life, Sadie told Stanley Stone. I moved room to room through my old house. I see the brightness of a late afternoon. I hear the rumble of the air conditioning there in the window in the den. I see the hollyhocks at my window, tall and staked upright with their big powder puff blooms, and then just as suddenly I might smell the fire in the fireplace and hear Horace chopping wood. Close your eyes. You will be amazed at what all you can see, how the seasons change, the light and temperature, and then people come into the room and you hear the sweet voices of your young children, or I smell the cologne I wore for almost 20 years, a gift from Horace every Christmas, Shalimar. Just the word made me feel important. One day when a little girl, Susie Otis, there in bright-colored dungarees, told me I smelled so good, I had the whole room say, Shalimar, Shalimar, and they waved their hands like they held magic wands. And sometimes it snows. It gets very quiet and beautiful in the snow, and Horace is always there when it snows. And sometimes I hear Horace clear his throat, and I see him pat his chest for heartburn. He said it was just a little heartburn. So many people get heartburn, and especially at Thanksgiving with all that food. And I have to get past that. I have to tiptoe past him. I have to get back to a good place. And oh my goodness, there is that silly, silly Paul wearing a costume I made him one Halloween. He's a sea monkey. All he wanted to be was a sea monkey, and I made him a funny merman-looking suit complete with a scepter and a crown, and there I am, right there in front of Horace's mother's old upright piano. I'm holding his little hand and telling him that he is the best little sea monkey there ever was. Yes, you are. Oh, yes, you are, sweetheart. And Lord, would you look at what shoes I'm wearing. I haven't thought of those in years. Bandolinos. Everybody thought it was something to have an Italian shoe being sold right here in Fulton. And they had little different colored straps trimming them out. Otherwise, it would have just been a plain old Mary Jane. They were soft. Mine were black with red straps, and I always wore them when I had cafeteria duty because they were so comfortable and I could slip up on somebody doing something he ought not to be doing, like dotting his milk straw into his beets so he could shoot out little purple cubes at the girl beside him. Oh, Lordy, what a mess. And I need to get back home, and there I am, back in the den and our little breakfast nook. A lot of people don't like pine paneling, but I do. I love it. My children saw all kinds of things there in the knotholes. There was a deer and a little elf. I'm not sure why, but our daughter Lynette always called that elf Doo-Doo, and she was scared of him and would say at almost every meal for about a year, Doo-Doo is watching me. Sadie paused, remembering where she really is, Pine Haven, wheelchair, Stanley Stone across from her. This has started to happen more and more. It takes a minute to know where she is. And then I'll just read a very brief introduction to the other retired school teacher who's quite a bit younger. She's the youngest person living in this facility. She came here because she said she was going to throw a dart at a map and go where it took her. What she hasn't told people is this is the 5th dart she threw. She was a high school teacher on a bit of a rant here about the way she left. I was a good teacher for 40 years and everything was normal. Then next thing I knew, the children were coming in with names like Bandana and Eurasia and Montpelier. And I said, those are things and places, children, and you are people. What on earth is going on? And there were names I couldn't even pronounce, and I can guarantee you that you don't readily go calling names you can't say. I'm looking for the Johns and Bills and Toms, and they just weren't there anymore. I mean, I'm a woman, a human. I was an English teacher and a bit of an amateur writer myself, but I'll tell you, things went so far off course I just didn't even know where I was anymore. I think it was the beginning of the end, too. What once was generous compassion for high school students with all their angst and crap going on turned into pure tea, agitation, and fury. I didn't get frustrated by who I am. I got frustrated by what they were reading and wanting to write about. I said, you're too smart for all this. Dwarves and wizards and gnomes and vampires, big blue aliens with tails like monkeys. I said, what I wouldn't give for a good old-fashioned story about somebody losing his or her virginity or getting an abortion. Grandma died, and for the first time I knew I was mortal. Or what about the one where the boy doesn't want to kill a deer, but Granddaddy makes him so he can be a man? I was wanting to write something myself, and it was dying to get out of my head, but couldn't find the door. It was also plugged up with all that malarkey. I had worked so hard, and all I was longing for was some whining little boy who didn't want to kill a deer. I was craving one, in fact, would have loved him and given him an instant A. And where did all the orphans go? Jane and Oliver and Pip? It's an honorable and very dramatic position. And the girl who's upset to have a period, where did she go? Or the one all torn up about losing her virginity, where did she go? If they're still out there, they're keeping a low profile and hiding from all those getting boobs for Christmas and graduation and making themselves up to look 30. I'll tell you what I wanted. I wanted dead deers and dead grandparents. I wanted anything other than a zombie or a shape-shifting demon wolf coyote. What am I to do with a bunch of aliens at Armageddon? Some of them said about their papers, I meant to be vague, like that might excuse something that didn't make a damn bit of sense, or the one who said I just didn't get what he was doing because it's so brilliant. I took my work seriously, and where did it get me? There I was asking for a little reality, and who wouldn't be after Columbine? What teacher on the planet after Virginia Tech didn't study her classroom windows and doors and the desk arrangements and hatch some plan for how she would protect all those young bodies, even the ones that got on her last goddamn nerve? And then this one boy, meaning to push my button, this one boy named something like Montreal Fedora, offered up some literary criticism on the death of Julius Caesar. He said, and I quote, them dudes was mean as shit, weren't they? And I said, those dudes were mean as shit. That is what I got in trouble for. Some kid in there ran home and tattled, not about what was being discussed in class, but that the teacher said shit. Miss Tyler, come to the office, please. Miss Tyler, please come to the office. This had happened many times. I made a notch on my desk, in fact, every time it happened, and one whole side looked like a fine-tooth comb. My principal was about 14 and had never read Shakespeare. How do I know? I asked him one day. In that moment when I needed him on my side, I almost wished that I had not done that, or that I had been a teacher who did not argue against prayer in my class, which I had done for years, or did not allow hats. But what did I care if they wore hats? Some of them might have been sporting bad haircuts they were ashamed of, or keeping their lice locked in. What did I care? I didn't tell on kids who refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance either. I figured we'd have plenty of big battles to fight, and I needed to choose the most important. I mean, these are humans growing up and witnessing the uterus as a competitive sporting arena. Who would have ever thought that? Irresponsible birth control will get you a TV show and a magazine cover. I said to my principal, the boy king, I asked him, if I retire like you say I have to, who will teach these children? Who will guard the gate? Who can promise me they'll tell the boys to keep their trousers zipped and tell the girls not to go promising things they do not intend to deliver? Who will teach birth control? Who will teach the value of literature? I said, who will tell them nobody gives a damn about how dwarfs and trolls have sex? If they had, the Brothers Grimm would have figured it out and already done it. They had every opportunity. What I wouldn't have given for one good stained soul, just one good stained soul. Thank you.
I'm going to cut a couple of pages out of this story, but I think it'll hang together okay. This is a story about two men in the early 80s. One is a veterinarian, the other a farmer, and the veterinarian is recently widowed. It's called 3 a.m. and the Stars Were Out. Carson had gone to bed early, so when the cell phone rang, he thought it might be his son or daughter calling to check on him. But as he turned to the night table, the clock's green glow read 2:18. Too late for a chat or any kind of good news. He lifted the phone and heard Darnell Coe's voice. I got trouble with a calf that ain't of a mind to get born, Darnell told him. Carson sat up on the mattress, settled his bare feet on the floor. Moments passed before he realized he was waiting for another body to do the same thing. Leave the bed and fix him a thermos of coffee. Almost 4 months and it still happened. Not just when he awoke, but other times too. He'd read something and lower the newspaper, about to speak to an empty chair. Or at the grocery store, reach in his shirt pocket for a neatly printed list that wasn't there. He dressed and got in the truck. All that would be needed lay in the pickup's lockbox, or just as likely, on Darnell's gun rack. Carson had closed his office 2 years ago, but the older farmers, some Carson had known since childhood, kept calling him. Because they know you won't expect them to pay up front, or at all, Doris had claimed, which was true in some cases, but for others, like Darnell Coe, it wasn't. We've been hitched to the same wagon this long, we'll pull it the rest of the way together, Darnell had said, reminding Carson that in the 1950s and half a world away, they'd made a vow to do so. As the town's last street light slid off the rearview mirror, Carson turned the radio off. It was something he often did on late night calls, making driving the good part, because what usually awaited him in a barn or pasture would not be good. A cow dying of milk fever, or a horse with a gangrenous leg. Things easily cured if a man hadn't wagered a vet fee against a roll of barbed wire or salt lick. There had been times when Carson had told men to their faces they were stupid to wait so long. But even a smart farmer did stupid things when he'd been poor too long. He'd figure after a drought had withered his corn, or maybe a hailstorm had beaten the life out of his tobacco allotment, that he was owed a bit of good luck. So he'd skimp on a calcium shot or pour turpentine on an infected limb, waiting it out until he'd waited too late, then calling Carson when a rifle was the only remedy. So driving had to be the good part, and it was. Carson had always been comfortable with solitude. As a boy, he'd loved to roam the woods, loved how quiet the woods could be. If deep enough in them, he wouldn't even hear the wind. But the best was afternoons in the barn. He'd climb up in the loft and lean back against a hay bale, then watch the sunlight begin to lean through the loft window, brightening the spilled straw. When the light was at its apex, the light shimmered as though coated with a golden foil. Dust motes speckled the air like midges. The only sound would be underneath, a calf restless in a stall, a horse eating from a feed bag. Carson had always felt an aloneness in those moments, but never in a sad way. Through the years, the same feeling had come back to him on late nights as he drove out of town. Doris would be back in bed and the children asleep as he left the house. Night would gather around him, the only light his truck's twin beams probing the road ahead. He would pass darkened farmhouses and barns as he made his way toward the glow of lamp or porch light. On the way back was the better time, though. He'd savor the solitude, knowing that later, when he opened the children's door, he would watch them a few moments as they slept, then lie down himself as Doris turned or shifted so that some part of their bodies touched. The road snaked upward. Nothing on the sides now but drop-offs and trees, an occasional white cross, the vase of wilted flowers. Teenage boys, for the most part, Carson knew, too young to think it could happen to them. It was that way in war as well, until you watched enough boys your own age being zipped up in body bags. Carson had been drafted by the Army 3 months after Darnell joined the Marines. They had not seen each other until the 7th Infantry supported the 1st Marine at Chosin Reservoir, crossing paths in a Red Cross soup line. In the late afternoon, the temperature already below zero, the Chinese, some men claimed 1 million of them, were pouring in over the Korean border, and no amount of casualties looked to stop them. Let's make a vow to God and them Chinese, too, that if they let us get back to North Carolina alive, we'll stay put and grow old together, Darnell had said. He'd held out his hand, and Carson had taken it. The road curved a final time, and the battered mailbox labeled Co. appeared. Carson turned off the blacktop and bumped up the drive, wheels crunching over the chert rock. The lantern hung just inside the barn mouth, offering a thin apron of light to help Carson make his way. Inside, it took a few moments to adjust to the barn's starless dark. Near the back stall, the cow laid on the straw floor. Darnell kneeled beside her, one hand stroking her flank. A stainless steel bucket was close by, already filled with water. Beside it, rags and a frayed bed sheet. Darnell's shotgun, not his rifle, leaned across the stall door. How long? Carson asked. 3 hours. Carson set the bags down and checked the cow's gums, then placed the stethoscope silver bell against the flank before pulling on a shoulder glove. I think it's breached, Darnell said. Carson lubed the glove and slid his hand and forearm inside, felt a bent leg, then a shoulder, another leg, finally the head. He slipped a finger inside the mouth and felt a suckle. Life stubbornly held on. Carson spread the tarp on the barn floor, set out what he'd need while Darnell retrieved a lantern, set it beside Carson. Inside the lantern's low light, the world shrank to a circle of straw. Within it, 2 old men, a cow, and though curtained, a calf. Carson did a quick swab and pushed in the needle, waited for the lidocaine to ease the contractions. Darnell still stroked the cow's flank. As a young vet, Carson had quickly learned there were some men and women, good people otherwise, who'd let a lame calf linger days, not bothering to end its misery. They do the same with a sheep with blackleg. Never Darnell, though, because he'd witnessed enough suffering in Korea not to wish it on man or animal, was what some people would think. But Carson knew it to be as much Darnell's innate decency. Why the shotgun? Carson asked. Coyotes. I've not heard any of late, but this is the sort of thing to draw them. Darnell nodded at the calf jack. Figure you'll have to use it. I'm going to try not to. The cow's abdomen relaxed and the round eyes calmed. Somewhere in the loft, a swallow stirred. Then the barn was silent and the lantern's light seemed to soften. The calf waited in its deeper darkness for Carson to birth it whole and alive, or dead and in pieces. Carson lubed his hand, no glove now, slid it inside, pushed the calf as far back as he could, making space. Sweat trickled down his forehead, his eyes closed now to better imagine the calf's body. He found the snout, tugged it forward a bit, then back, and then to one side, and then another. Carson's heart banged his panting chest like a quickening hammer. The muscles in his neck and shoulder burned. He stopped for a minute, his arm still inside as he caught his breath. What do you think? Darnell asked. Maybe, Carson answered. Half an hour passed before he got the head aligned. Darnell gave him a wet hand cloth and Carson wiped the sweat off his face and neck. He rested a little while longer before nodding at the tarp. Okay, let's get that leg. Darnell hooked the OB chain to the handle and gave the other end to Carson, who looped the chain around the front leg. Darnell gripped the handle and dug his boot heels into the barn floor. Okay, Carson said, his hand on the calf's leg. The chain slowly tightened. Carson bent the foreleg to ensure the hoof didn't rake the uterine wall. Darnell did the hard work now, grunting as his muscles strained. They spoke little, Carson nodding left or right when needed. Minutes passed as the leg gave and caught. Like cracking a safe. That's how Carson thought of it, finding the combination that made the last tumbler fall into place. It felt like that, the womb swinging open and the calf withdrawn. There were times he could almost feel the click, hear it. Home free, Darnell gasped when the leg finally aligned. Come morning, liniment would grease their lower backs and shoulders. They would move gingerly. New twinges and aches added to others gained over 8 decades. Lord help us if our kids knew what we were up to tonight, Darnell said as he rubbed his shoulder. They'd likely fix you and me up with those electronic ankle bracelets, keep us under house arrest. Which would show they got more sense than we have, Carson replied. The second leg took less than a minute. The calf slipped into a wider world. Carson cleared mucus from the snout, placed a finger inside the mouth, and felt a tug. Much as we've done this, you'd think it might get a tad bit easier, Darnell said. But that's not the way of it. No, Carson said. Most things just get harder. The last thing was calcium and antibiotic shots, but Carson doubted his hand capable of holding the needle steady. It could wait a few minutes. The men sat on the barn floor, weary arms crossed on raised knees as they waited for the calf to gain its legs. Carson leaned his head on his forearms and closed his eyes. He listened as the calf's hooves scattered straw, the body lifting and falling back until it figured out the physics. Once it did, Carson raised his head and watched the calf's knees wobble but hold. The cow was soon up too. The calf nuzzled and found a teat, began to suckle. "There's a wonder to it yet," Darnell said. Carson didn't disagree. They watched a few more moments, not speaking. The lantern's wick burned low now. Carson resettled his hands, let his fingertips shift straw and touch the firmer earth as he leaned back. Only when the flame was a sinking flicker inside the glass did Darnell raise himself up to one knee. "Now let's see if we can get up too," he said. Darnell grunted and stood, knees popping as he did so. He reached a hand under Carson's upper arm and helped him up. Carson's hinges grinding as well. Darnell lifted the lantern, turned the brass screw until light filled the globe again. He set the lantern down and walked over to the barn mouth, only a silhouette visible until a match rasped and illuminated his face a moment. "So you're smoking again," Carson said. "Nobody around to argue against it," Darnell answered. "Funny how you miss even the nagging." "That's true," Carson said. Stepped over to the barn mouth and leaned against the opposite beam. The stars sprawled yet overhead, though now Venus had tucked itself in among them. Though no more than a dozen feet apart, the men were mere shadows to each other. Carson watched the orange cigarette tip rise and hold a moment, then descend. A shifting came from the barn's depths, then a lapping sound as the cow's tongue washed the calf. "Doris was a fine woman," Darnell said. "Yes," Carson said, "she was." 4 months now, ain't it? Almost. "It does ease up some eventually," Darnell said. He stubbed out his cigarette. Something between a sigh and a snicker crossed the dark between them. "What's tickling your funny bone?" Carson asked. "Just curious if the widows are showing up with their casseroles yet." "No," Carson said. None since the funeral." "Well, it won't be long. Once it commences, you'll think you're in the Pillsbury Bake-Off." "I'm not looking for another wife," Carson said. "I wasn't either, but they come after me anyway. We're a rare commodity, partner. One time I went down to that senior center. It was me and Ansel Turner and 30 blue-haired women. One of them decided we should have a dance. As soon as the music started, I got out of there and ain't been back, but poor old Ansel was in his wheelchair, so he couldn't get away. He was remarried in 6 months. They finally gave up on me, but you're fresh game." Darnell paused. "I ain't making light of your loss." "I know that," Carson said. "I've had plenty enough grieving words and hangdog faces. The sad part I don't need any help with." He was rested enough now to give the shots, but waited. Except for speaking to his son and daughter on the phone, Carson hadn't much wanted to talk to people of late. But tonight, here in the dark with Darnell, there was a pleasure in it. "The stars don't show out in town like they do here," Carson said. "I'm not down there often of a night to know," Darnell answered. "But it's nice to look up, see something that never changes. When I was in Korea, I'd find the Big Dipper, the Huntress, and the Archer. They hung in the sky different, but I could still make them out, same as if I was in North Carolina. There was a comfort in doing that, especially when the fighting got thick. I did that a couple of times too, Carson said. Darnell lit another cigarette, stepped outside the barn, listening till he was satisfied. They ain't yapping about it, Darnell said, but they could still be out there. Carson half stifled a yawn. I can put us on a pot of coffee. No, Carson answered. I'll be on my way as soon as I give the shots. Back in Korea, we'd not have figured it to turn out this way, would we? Darnell said. I mean, we've gotten a lot more than we ever thought. Yes, Carson replied. We have. Carson went back inside, gave the shots, packed up. Darnell lifted the lantern in one hand and the medicine bag in the other, led him back down to the pickup. Darnell opened his billfold and offered 5 $10 bills that, as always, Carson refused. They shook hands and he got back in the truck. As Carson bumped down the drive, he looked back and saw the lantern's glow moving toward the barn. Darnell would hang the lantern back on the nail, maybe smoke another cigarette as he stood at the barn mouth, attentive as any good sentry.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.